We are all still under these stay-at-home orders. Every state in this country has issued a declaration, a disaster declaration, and we are giving up a lot of our liberties, our rights, for the greater good, the public health, to make sure that everybody stays safe and healthy. So the question is, how long do our leaders have to continue on this path? Our friend, four-time Assembly member Mike Gatto is here to talk about the constitutionality of all of this. Hi, Mike.
Hi, it's great to join you.
Good to see you. Okay, so my first question is, I see a lot of people saying, you know, I'm giving up my rights. Is this legal? Blanket, is it legal for them to tell me I have to stay home? Is it legal for them to tell me I can't go to work? Is it legal for them to tell me I can't go to the beach or to public places?
Yeah, so executives, governors and mayors and presidents have broad authority as long as there has been a disaster declaration. There's a famous quote from a Supreme Court decision where a justice said, the Constitution is not a suicide pact, meaning that we don't obviously have to harm the public just to follow constitutional rights. But I do believe that there are limits, and executives can only go so far. Several of the actions that governors and mayors have taken in the past several weeks, I think have crossed the line, and other measures, of course, are permissible.
All right, let's talk about obviously at this point, it's an opinion of yours right now, so we want to make sure, it's based in fact, and of course, you're not just like shooting from the hip here, but it is an opinion. But I'm genuinely interested in what is the line? What crosses the line as to overuse of power versus the public good?
Sure, so let me give you an example. So the other day, there was a mayor of a city who said that churches cannot hold services, even if they hold them in parking lots, even if everybody stays in their cars and it's a drive-through. And a federal judge said, you're allowing McDonald's to have drive-throughs, you're allowing Home Depot to let people congregate in a parking lot. This starts to look like you're discriminating against religious institutions. That violates the First Amendment. You can't do that.
Okay. And what would you think, in your opinion, is something that has been enacted by a governor or a mayor or, that we think might cross the line, but it actually doesn't?
Well, gosh, I hate for, I think all the parents out there who are suffering through the stay-at-home orders and homeschooling their kids and everything, and a lot of people are anxious to go back to work. But chances are that the stay-at-home orders, at least at this point, do not violate the Constitution because, they're taking reasonable steps calculated to slow the spread of a disease during an emergency. And because of that, somebody challenging the stay-at-home orders would probably lose if they went to court because this will be seen as a reasonable step. And there's a whole bunch of stuff in between. There's a lot of different other rights that are implicated during this pandemic.
Like what?
Well, for example, a lot of people we talked about last week, probably coming soon will be the government will say, you need to get a coronavirus passport. You need to prove that you've been tested and that you're clean. A lot of people floated that as a way to get the economy back. Technically that's a search. They're searching your blood, and that's something that typically the Constitution wouldn't tolerate. I don't know if people are going to sue under that. That will be something that's pretty darn borderline as far as I'm concerned.
I would say 100% somebody's going to sue over that. Come on. So that's the delicate balance that we are all living through right now, which is fascinating and also scary. So what is the line? What are we willing to give up? I think the question really becomes, what are we willing to give up in personal liberty for the greater good? And my thought is that everybody individually has a different line. So how do you make that an umbrella issue for all of us?
Yeah, you're right. Everybody does have a different line about what they're willing to give up. But, courts in history have been pretty uniform, and there have been some themes that have developed. When a president crosses the line or a governor crosses the line by doing something like interning the Japanese or, going around in the entertainment industry and trying to root out communists by forcing people to divulge their political preferences, history looks back at those things with disdain. We look back and say that crossed the line, and a court would be likely to strike down laws like that. Then there are other rights that we have given up, things like after 9/11. We lost a lot of rights after 9/11. Some people have noted those typically don't come back. as long as the court does say that that's, hey, people want to be safe to fly and these things seem like they're reasonable, those rights never come back. But then there's a third category of things that are, clearly legal. Right now, most of the stuff that executives is doing falls in that category. But I think there's going to start to be a lot of pushback and a lot of lawsuits if this continues for longer than, let's say, another month.
Okay, I have two issues in there. One, so you mentioned the testing and perhaps the blanket order that everybody has to be tested in order to re-enter society, which obviously causes constitutional, questions. And the other one that I think is interesting that I've been hearing circulated a lot is that they're going to use cell phone data to determine and track you, perhaps, and they couch it by saying, well, you have to opt in. In reality, we know that's not really the case. So do those things cross the line?
Well, contact tracing is a really interesting one. That's what they call that cell phone tracking to see who's been in touch with whom. That would be the idea, of course, that typically you're free to associate with whoever you wish. You're free to assemble. You can go protest, and those 30 people who protest something have a right to tell the government that they're upset. But in this circumstance, the government would be monitoring you. Personally, this scares me. This is something that I think is really alarming. It's something that Americans have traditionally said, whoa, this starts to sound like a dictatorship somewhere else in the world. But it's amazing. Some very, very, great thinkers out there are proposing this, and they're in fact demanding it. You look on Twitter, there's a lot of very, very brilliant journalists saying, we demand contact tracing right now. For me, it's a little troubling. And I think something like that, unless the government can show that there's a clear, ability to reduce the spread of coronavirus due to it, I think that courts might have some issues with it.
And so the remedy, by the way, just so we're clear about all of this, the remedy for all of these things, these orders that are being enacted that could potentially cause liberty issues, I mean, the way to remedy that is through the court system?
Yes. And, as some has pointed out, though, yes, a lot of courts out there are open for temporary restraining orders and emergency edicts, but by and large, courts are closed as well. So right now you have the perfect storm for constitutional violations because the courts are overwhelmed, their hours have been reduced, judges are very skeptical about allowing certain cases to proceed. So we're in a weird situation that I would say the United States has probably never faced. And that is, you have a non-war, you have a pandemic going on, you have executives, governments, and governors, mayors, and president taking steps that are very borderline from a constitutional perspective, and the courts aren't even, in many cases, open to allow you to challenge them.
My last question to you is, all of our leaders are operating under these kind of emergency powers. These emergency declarations have been enacted, so our governors and our president and, all of our leaders are kind of doing these things, they say, for the public good, and because it's this emergency situation. How long, legally, constitutionally, is an emergency? I'm not a constitutional expert, but an emergency, in my view, has a time limit. Is there a time limit?
Precisely. And, that's something that dictators in, banana republics have traditionally, it's a constant emergency. There's always somebody who might invade us or something going on. But the sad thing is, a lot of these things, and courts have even observed this, a lot of these things are really enforced electorally. If an executive, tries to take emergency powers too far, then there's going to be some pushback. There's going to be pushback from the media, from the people, from the legislatures, and ultimately the voters. The reality is that is some of our only remedies is go out there and vote, make sure that if somebody, but obviously as we stare down the summer and possibly being under de facto house arrest for a long period of time, voting in November is not necessarily the most comforting, but a lot of these things are just enforced by public opinion.
Whew. Well, that's terrifying, Mike. Jeez. All right. Well, this has been a really, really interesting conversation. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of questions that come out of this conversation, and hopefully we will see you again and answer them. You all are doing well at home?
Doing well, surviving everything, homeschooling the 3 little kids, and hopefully you're doing well as well.
All right. Thanks, Mike.